Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey, foreign editor of The Daily Beast, is with us. Welcome back as well to Luke Baker, Paris bureau chief of the Reuters news agency, from sister station Radio France International, Elena Gabrielan. And we're also pleased to welcome back Georg Blume, Paris correspondent for German weekly Die Zeit. It seemed like it was a week where we finally had white smoke from the other side of the Rhine. Germany's longest ever wait for a government was finally over. Conservatives and social democrats announcing another grand coalition after 4 months of stop-and-start negotiations. But the deal struck between Angela Merkel and Martin Schulz is far from in the bag, it seems. In a bid to convince rank and file from the SPD to approve it, Schulz, the former president of the European Parliament, first tendering his resignation as party leader, and now giving up on his bid to be the foreign minister. Is this Auf Wiedersehen, Martin Schulz?
It certainly looks like, yes. And it shows how difficult it is for his party to really join that big coalition. I wouldn't say there's white smoke yet. We have an election of the members of the SPD party in front of us, and just tonight
but it's an incredible turn, isn't it? Putting his resignation in the balance to get the deal approved.
He had said himself that he's never going to join a government led by Chancellor Merkel, so he's only following his own advice a few months ago. And I think it was he lost credibility, and it will only help maybe the grand coalition that he is not the chief minister then to represent it. But really, I have a friend tonight who came from Berlin. He's a member of the local SPD. He is a 62 or 63, I don't remember really, and he's really not a radical. He is a very reasonable person. He's not sure if he's going to vote for or against. It is really in the doldrums.
All the hesitation, even though Merkel has given the finance ministry portfolio, the big one, to the SPD. Up to now, that had been the in previous coalition governments, it had gone to her party.
It should be a week of victory for this little opposition party. They get almost half the big ministries in Germany. But you see what happened after the deal was announced. They just struggled among themselves. The acting foreign minister said there was a deal broken. Now the other one is stepping back. It's an image of complete out of control of this party in a way.
I mean, we're starting with a very unhappy marriage. How well is that going to work? I mean, I see this as well as the SPD has been offered a lot of things on a plate. 6 ministries, very powerful ones, an equivalent number of ministries to the CDU, CSU. But so Merkel has given up a lot of ground, and yet still, it could be rejected by the membership, which is astonishing. But it really says to me, it's the end of days for Merkel, right? I mean, any idea, even if she manages to pull off this government, the fact that she would survive for 4 years seems unlikely. The Youth League of the CDU, CSU is very up in arms about her leadership. They want a change. So she could go in a couple of years. And that's dangerous for the whole of Europe.
No, and it's unbelievable. 6 months ago, and Merkel was at the heights of her power, and she seemed like the big leader of Europe. How it has gone down. It's almost.
I think actually the problem is also the leadership in the SPD, but at the same time also their popularity in Germany, because we saw that during last elections they've got 20%. Now the popularity is 17%. It is really not so far that Alternative Germany, which has 15%. So if, for example, this opposition party starts becoming weaker and weaker, so we could have this dangerous raising popularity of Alternative Germany, which is a Eurosceptic, which is a Russophile and anti-globalist party.
Yeah, and again, just turn the clock back 48 hours when the government was announced. The same Martin Schulz seemed to be harboring a Cheshire cat grin as news broke that the SPD was getting a slew of big portfolios, including, again, the finance ministry.
We want society to show solidarity. And I believe that what we have imposed bears the stamp of social democracy. We've had a strong influence on the drafting of this coalition contract, and we're also pleased to have succeeded in some compromises that were difficult for our Conservative colleagues to make.
And it really did seem, when you read the platform that's been agreed upon, like a change in direction. Change when it comes to things like labor reform. We've just had this big deal with the unions that increases wages, that the Germans, well, are becoming more like their neighbors, perhaps?
The biggest change in what they're proposing is a new heaven for Europe, you know, that they're really going to work for further European integration. And that is what Macron has been asking for, of course, for many months now. But still, you know, there is no conviction, neither of the politicians themselves, it seems, nor the people behind this government. So whatever they announce, all the things they announce are in some way in doubt, in question, with whatever happens with the AfD and the real, who turns out to be the real opposition now. And
yeah, the Eurosceptic AfD, which won 13% of the vote.
Absolutely, and we are really unsure about how this is gonna, turn out in a few months in the public debate, with so little support for a new government right now.
Christopher Dickey, on Wednesday, imagine you're Emmanuel Macron. You get the news that the former president of the European Parliament is going to be the new foreign minister and is, as you just heard, touting this more big government infrastructure spending kind of line. It must be quite a disappointment now come Friday, perhaps.
Well, I think it is a disappointment for Macron. But on the other hand, if Merkel can pull some kind of coherent government out of all these negotiations, and it is strong enough to move forward in almost any direction, Macron will go along with it. Macron will play ball with that German government. The real big concern of Macron and of many people is that the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, will wind up with some kind of outsized voice in the parliament and start to influence policy as if Marine Le Pen had come in with a major role in the French government, which she didn't.
I think this is a real problem for Macron. I think he's invested a lot in Merkel, and they apparently have a good relationship. And I think he really needs her there as a fixed, strong foot in Europe in order to push through some of the changes he's been talking about since the German election in September for the Eurozone, that he believes is going to make it more stable. So without Merkel there and able to exercise greater strength, even with SPD potentially being a partner on some of these issues, I still feel that for Macron, that long-term trajectory that he wanted to have with Merkel isn't there. And I think that's a problem for him.
Or let's listen to Angela Merkel. It was clear her fourth term as Chancellor was indeed going to be different, turning left, as we were saying, on labor policy, and right on immigration, with the Bavarian conservative leader of the CSU getting a bolstered interior ministry portfolio.
Solid finances are our brand, and we want to invest in transport infrastructure, and we want to provide people with more social security, just as we want to put more into domestic security. And one of the most difficult subjects was how to manage migration and the theme of integration. And we did not take the easy way out and kept pointing out the importance of being humanitarian on the one hand, but also managing and controlling the situation. It wasn't easy, but we found a good package of measures.
Humanitarian on the one hand, but also managing and controlling the immigration situation. Code, perhaps, for closing the borders?
Well, actually, I think that such kind of declaration is also made maybe to not less the ground of conservative part to the alternatives Germany, because making this coalition agreement, it is somehow they turn to the left. But, for example, Social Democrats, they couldn't go to the left because this ground is occupied by left parties, so that's why it is centralized. But at the same time, the question is such kind of questions like immigration or which are really very, which concern really this conservative part. They don't give the ground for the conservative parties. Do you know?
Yeah, and we just heard Luke Baker saying how Angela Merkel's days are numbered. But the way you describe it, Elena, it sounds like she's the only one who can manage this juggling act.
I think that maybe she seems to be a little bit weaker during these negotiations and a little bit tired, but still she has this strongness in Germany, at the same time also in European Union. So maybe she's only the one who can consolidate this force and to not let these grounds, like on the left and on the right, to be occupied by these alternative parties.
Well, of course, it's very disturbing, I would say, when you look at the immigration issue, when you had Merkel 2 years ago being the one who said, we are going to make it, we're going to take these refugees who really come from war situations, and and Europe is going to host them. And at that time, Macron, who was maybe the only European politician who stood by her, at least in France, and now we are 2 years later, and both of them who now can really form the big two in Europe are so defensive on their immigration policies.
Yeah,
and
but I think
I really think they have to stand tall on that issue. That is Merkel's, for a lifetime as a politician, her landmark deal was for the refugees. If she is really losing this, her stand there, it's going to hurt her and not make her stronger.
I think that history will be very kind to Merkel on the refugee issue. She let in, what's the total number? I don't know, 1 million refugees?
900,000,
yeah. A huge number of refugees into a country, like most Western European countries, that is aging very quickly. These are decrepit countries. They need young people with a lot of energy. Refugees bring that. Immigrants bring that. That's hard to accept, even for Donald Trump in America.
Your American experience, which is talking.
It absolutely is. Look at the OECD. Yeah. Look at the OECD numbers on any developed countries. The youngest country is the United States. Italy is ancient. Yeah. It's got negative birth rate. Germany is aging. Who is going to be the workforce in these countries? And frankly, letting in the Syrians was brilliant, because many of them are very highly educated, highly industrious, and tremendously productive.
I would agree that history, one hopes, would be on her side. But I think the problem that emerges is within unity within the European Union. And I think in that regard, she's losing the debate. The rhetoric coming out of Hungary and Poland and others is not what anyone wants.
Yeah, the ones who, by the way, don't have any refugees.
Right. But the point is that in those discussions at 2027, 28 in Europe, the tone of the debate is leaning away from open borders, and she's kind of lost that debate. And
but in fact, at this point, she doesn't want open borders. Nobody in Europe wants open borders. Everybody understands that if you've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people floating across the Mediterranean at a cost to their lives, who, by the way, are not coming from Syria but are coming from sub-Saharan Africa, then somebody's got to take control of the situation. And you get crazy statements. Berlusconi is talking about deporting 600,000 people from Italy. Please.
But it's going to have an impact on Italy's election, too.
He will be elected, or his party will be elected.
Well, that's a prediction that may or may not come true next month.
He and Salvini, absolutely.
When those elections happen. Hand it to Elon Musk. The U.S. entrepreneur knows how to get our attention. The world's heaviest commercial rocket taking off from Cape Canaveral with innovations that include the boosters detaching and then floating back down to Earth. SpaceX's Falcon Heavy with only one item on board for its maiden run. Yes, one of Musk's own Tesla roadsters.
His first.
I'm still trying to absorb everything that happened because it seems surreal to me. I had this image of just a giant explosion on the pad with, that wheel bouncing down the road, and like the Tesla logo landing somewhere with a thud. But fortunately, that's not what happened.
Fortunately, that's not what happened, but he did get a crash of a different kind later in the week, Christopher Dickey, with Tesla burning through, it turns out, when they released their corporate earnings, $3.4 billion last year, including $787 million just for the fourth quarter. And the jury's still out as to whether or not this SpaceX mission is going to work.
Well, it is, but it's sort of the direction that things had to go. I mean, the federal government in the United States was not going to continue paying directly from federal coffers to do it. They're much happier. Even the Trump administration, the Republicans are much happier with a system that pays private enterprise to do that, although they have not loved Elon Musk in the past. And you know, the U.S. sometimes depends on visionaries who burn through a lot of money. Some people do it by building rockets, and some people become president of the United States.
Luke Baker, do you believe?
You know, it's hard to bet against this guy, right? I mean, he's a serial successful entrepreneur who seems to have limitless ambition and limitless, you know, conception of ideas that, you know, he thinks are going to change the world.
Again, I repeat, $3.4 billion.
Look at the valuation. The value of the company Tesla is equal, I think, to about BMW, twice the size, the value on the stock market of Renault. And, you know, and yet it produces a fraction, a minimal fraction of the number of cars. But the belief in the market seems astonishing, actually. It doesn't seem to add up. It doesn't make economic sense. But I think people think this guy's been a serial successful entrepreneur. And if the moment is now for the world to change its attitude towards, you know, what sort of vehicles it drives, moving away from petrol, moving towards, you know, environmentally sustainable vehicles, maybe this guy is the magic moment. It seems crazy.
Georg Blume?
I don't know. I would bet that the bosses of Mercedes and BMW are less afraid of him after that than before.
I actually was surprised in what way we were covering also this event in different places of world. For example, in France, even if, for example, Arianespace could be worried a little bit about the growing concurrent in private sector. Well, still in France, we were considering that it was some historical, revolutionary, triumphal project. And in Russia, for example, we were talking about some advertising trick of somebody who is not very serious. He's just entrepreneur. So what did he do? We could do also. So we are also talented as Americans. So they tried really to undermine the importance of this
there's a kind of, we were talking about the nationalism of the Olympics. There's a bit of an economic nationalism here.
Again, in a Cold War spirit that we are in this competition with Americans. And I'm absolutely sure if he was a Russian guy who launched this Tesla, he would be called the second Gagarin, maybe. So now he's American.
But it's also direct competition because for a long time, American space companies were using Russian rockets.
Absolutely.
And it made a hell of a lot of money for the Russians. Now, SpaceX and these other companies, they're pushing that market away, and that's a huge...
All right, before we go, in our ongoing series where we examine Christopher Dickey's claim that Emmanuel Macron is playing Donald Trump, Exhibit A this week is news that Trump wants a French-style military parade, this after coming to Paris as guest of honor on Bastille Day last July the 14th. Christopher Dickey, I can see kind of a smug look on your face there.
I predicted these things. I mean, really, Davos was the key there, because obviously the people who run Davos wanted to please him, and my guess is that they talked to Macron. How come you get along so well with Trump? I mean, you're different on so many issues. So what did they do to welcome Trump at Davos onto the stage? And I've been to Davos many times. I've never seen this before. They have a military brass band that welcomes him on the stage at Davos. It was like something out of Gilbert and Sullivan. It was ridiculous. But this clearly is the kind of thing that appeals to Trump and probably appeals to his core. So if he wants to have a military parade, which, according to the Washington Post, he said he wanted to be like the one in France, he'll probably get his wish.
But it is astonishing. I think, yeah, you're right. It's totally up Trump Street, right? And I think up the street of the core of his supporters, whatever you want to call them, red staters or sort of whatever. You know, I can see that militaristic, bombastic, nationalistic display, which we don't expect in the United States, which hasn't happened for decades, and which
from a draft dodger, by the way.
From a draft dodger, absolutely. Yeah. But And we were saying before, I mean, where would he hold it? Maybe on his birthday, just to up the ego factor of the national parade on Donald Trump's birthday.
And the Banana Republic factor.
Exactly. No, it's not.
Well, it's not up the street of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., which is Democrat, and they've tweeted tanks, but no tanks.
I missed that. That's fabulous.
But it's unclear when and...
when, where, how. But apparently, according to the Washington Post story, this came up in a closed meeting in the Pentagon, in the tank, which is their secret, super secret room. I guess not that secret because it leaked to the Washington Post. And it was Trump. People were like, "Oh, you'd like a military parade?" He says, "No, I want a military parade. I want what they did in France."
But what are we going to celebrate? Actually, United States will organize always a military
our great victory
parade
in Iraq, our great victory in Afghanistan. Oh,
They're talking about doing it on Veterans Day, I saw as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, look,
November
today...
11th will be the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I.
Okay, well, that's something.
That's
but I mean, look, you
reasonable.
had Jim Mattis come out today and say, I'm supposed to, I think he said, it was an offhand remark. It was like, these things are emotional events. I try and save them the emotion for my girlfriend. I mean, so that was... seemed a bit of a strain, but clearly he wasn't that excited about it. There was a guy, I think one of the Special Forces U.S. Soldiers who took part in the killing of Osama bin Laden, tweeted saying this is outrageous, ridiculous, this is not the sort of thing that American forces need or reflects their strength around the world. So I think that, there's also the risk that this really kind of undermines some of that unity.
It's probably going to be coordinated by Clint Eastwood. That would be my guess.
And to follow one of Donald Trump's favorite lines, stay tuned. Luke Baker, I want to thank you. I want to thank Georg Blume, Elena Gabrielon, Christopher Dickey. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Simon Harding.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, François.
So the Olympics are on.
That's right.
And so is the Olympic truce.
Absolutely. And as you can expect, plenty of buzz on the Olympics on social media, especially about the opening ceremony in PyeongChang. However, one thing that also caught the attention today was the ban on the Russians, which was upheld after plenty of debate and last-minute appeals. And if we go straight away to an article in Vice News, we can see the title here. Somehow Russia is more of an outsider than North Korea
not clickbait. I don't know what is.
The Winter Olympics. But it's quite telling because the decision, therefore, puts Russia in a very difficult position. And if we actually dive into the article just a little bit more, there's an extract here which is very interesting, which reads, "The symbolic switch from the Olympic host to pariah of the sports world is a humiliating turnaround for a country that has long seen Olympic glory as a symbol of national power." And this, to Putin and many others, will be seen as a defeat, of course. If we move on, we look at the New York Times, which takes a very different approach to what's been going on, essentially what is going on. It's leading to a lot of questions of what is Russia doing at the Olympics? What is the OAR, Olympic Athletics Russia? And there's a lot of questions coming, a lot of confusion that's come out for everyone. And that's also led to the BBC saying here, how is banned Russia sending the third biggest team to PyeongChang? So plenty of questions there. 169 athletes, of course, who are going. And if we click on the link, there's another title there, of course. When is a Russian not a Russian? What will Team OAR look like?
Team OAR.
Why are they allowed at the Winter Olympics in 2018? And this whole idea of controversy that's coming out of this has led to a new wave of thought, which is a little bit of anger as to why is Russia actually there. We can see this from this tweet here by Ben Rothenberg, who's a freelance journalist at the Times. Says, "One night into watching Olympics and Team Olympic athletes from Russia is already grinding my gears real hard. Either ban the country or don't." So we can see that there's a very clear idea of why is Russia there? Should they be banned? Should they not be banned? And people are really confused. Once again, to go back to that, Olympics are happening right now, and it's curling against Russia, possibly the band OAR, which is, of course, an American rock band. So it's a bit poking fun at them, really, and no one sort of understands where we are at. So time will tell as to what happens there.
Nor is it understandable why mixed curling took so long to take as an
brilliant
Olympic sport.
Brilliant sport.
The unification, or the unified team that between the two Koreas, of course, is the other story.
Absolutely, and this is the picture behind me, which you can see, which has caught all the attention. I know you were talking about it earlier on in the show, but it's been a picture that's grabbed the media spotlight, a lot of reactions, a lot of buzz on that. Time magazine, of course, have come out and said North and South Korea share historic handshake at the Olympics. And what's very curious about this article in particular is the terminology that's been used, the words broad smiles, warmth, very welcoming. So you can see that it has been a show to show that they are, of course, united. Whether or not that's staged is another question that comes through. Of course, this comes at a very important time, a crucial time in the negotiations between both Koreas. But still, it's a momentous occasion, I think, for both countries, for them to be at this time of appeasement, really.
All right, and Luke Baker was asking earlier, when are we going to hear God Save the Queen during the Olympics?
Hopefully soon. Maybe in curling, actually.
There we go.
But to continue on this theme, we can see that this theme, it's a bit of a funny gif here to show watching North and South Korea coming out together gives this kind of emotion. But I think it is an emotion that's reflected across the world is, thank goodness that we're at a stage where we can see two enemies that, 2 months ago seemed ready to go to war with each other and who are now marching side by side. This is another picture from the opening ceremony, which has caught a lot of attention. The Trump and Kim lookalikes who were thrown out. It's created a lot of buzz. I think that picture really speaks for itself. There's not much I can say on that. But it's certainly been a phenomenal opening ceremony. A lot has been said about what the Koreans have managed to do, including this, which is 1,218 drones which formed together to make the Olympic rings. It's been incredible. It's a Guinness World Record which has been beaten, which has been recognised by the Guinness World Book of Records, and which, of course, will go into the book sooner. And this, of course, has also garnered a lot of attention. The Tongan athlete, Peter Taufatufoa, who marched at Rio, and who was competing in the taekwondo discipline and who will now do the cross-country skiing. There's plenty there, but in a sub-6-degree temperature, he managed to keep his traditional attire.
With oil, I'm told.
Absolutely.
All right, many thanks.
Got the body to do it.
Many thanks for that, Simon Harding. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.